In 2011, millions of people across the Arab world believed they were witnessing the birth of a new era. Dictators who had ruled for decades were falling. Crowds filled city squares demanding freedom, dignity, and democracy. What began with a single act of protest in Tunisia quickly spread across the Middle East, toppling governments that once seemed untouchable. But hidden beneath the celebrations was a problem few people understood. The revolutions knew how to remove rulers. They did not know what would replace them. This is the story of how the Arab Spring changed the Middle East forever in December 2010. The Arab world appeared frozen in place across North Africa and the Middle East. Authoritarian governments had ruled for decades. Presidents remained in power for so long that many citizens could scarcely imagine life without them. Elections were often tightly controlled, opposition movements were restricted, and security services maintained a constant watch over society. Many governments believed they had achieved something close to permanence then, in a small Tunisian town. A single act of desperation changed everything. 26-year-old Mohamed Bouazizi earned a living selling fruits and vegetables from a street cart in the town of Sidi Bouzid, like many young Tunisians. He struggled with unemployment, rising prices, and limited economic opportunities. His daily life reflected frustrations shared by millions across the region. On December 17, 2010, local authorities confiscated his cart. Accounts differ on the exact details of the confrontation. But what happened next became one of the defining moments of modern Middle Eastern history. Humiliated and unable to secure justice from local officials, Bouazizi set himself on fire outside a government building. News of the incident spread quickly at first. The demonstrations that followed appeared local and limited, but they tapped into something much larger. Tunisians were not protesting only for one man. They were expressing years of anger over corruption, unemployment, inequality, and political repression. Crowds gathered in cities and towns throughout the country. The government of President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali responded in a way familiar to many authoritarian regimes. Security forces attempted to restore order through arrests, force, and intimidation. For decades, such methods had usually worked. This time was different. Each attempt to suppress the protests seemed to generate new demonstrations. Videos spread through social media platforms, and satellite television networks carried images across the Arab world. Millions watched events unfold in real time. Protests continued to grow. Workers joined the movement. Lawyers joined the movement. Students joined the movement. Even groups that rarely cooperated with one another found themselves united by a common demand for change. As the crisis deepened, the government struggled to regain control. Ben Ali had ruled Tunisia since 1987. For more than 2 decades, he appeared firmly entrenched. Few observers predicted that his government could collapse within weeks, yet by January 2011, the situation had become increasingly unstable. Demonstrations reached the capital. Public anger intensified. International attention focused on Tunisia. And behind closed doors, officials faced a reality they had never expected. Fear was no longer working. For years, authoritarian systems across the region had relied on an unwritten understanding. Citizens feared the consequences of resistance more than they desired political change. Now that calculation was beginning to disappear. On January 14, 2011, President Ben Ali fled Tunisia. The announcement shocked the region. A ruler who had governed for 23 years was suddenly gone. Celebrations erupted throughout Tunisia. Crowds filled streets and public squares, and for many participants, the moment felt historic. They believed they were witnessing the birth of a new political era, but the impact extended far beyond Tunisia's borders in neighboring countries. Millions watched the downfall of a leader who had once seemed untouchable. The lesson was simple but revolutionary. If a dictator could fall in Tunisia, perhaps dictators could fall elsewhere as well. For decades, authoritarian governments had cultivated an image of strength and inevitability. In just 28 days, That image had cracked, no one knew it yet. But the events in Tunisia were not the end of a story, they were the beginning of one across the Arab world. People were beginning to ask a question that many governments never expected them to ask aloud. What if change was actually possible? The fall of Tunisia's president sent shockwaves across the Arab world. For years, many citizens had believed that challenging entrenched rulers was futile. Governments possessed armies, police forces, intelligence agencies, and vast political networks. Resistance often seemed impossible, yet Tunisia had demonstrated something extraordinary. Mass protests could work. Nowhere was this lesson more powerful than in Egypt. Egypt was the most populous country in the Arab world and one of the region's most influential states. Since 1981, President Hosni Mubarak had governed the country through a system that emphasized stability and security. To supporters, he represented order. To critics, he symbolized political stagnation and authoritarian rule inspired by events in Tunisia. Activists called for demonstrations. On January 25, 2011, the response exceeded expectations. Thousands gathered in cities across Egypt. Then tens of thousands, soon hundreds of thousands. The center of the movement became Cairo's Tahrir Square. Day after day, protesters occupied the square. They represented diverse backgrounds and political beliefs. Some demanded democratic reforms. Others sought economic opportunities. Many simply wanted an end to corruption and political repression. What united them was the belief that Egypt could change the government. Initially attempted to contain the demonstrations, security forces confronted protesters. Communications were disrupted. Officials hoped the movement would lose momentum instead. The crowds continued to grow. Images from Tahrir Square spread around the world. Television broadcasts showed enormous gatherings demanding political change. The square became a symbol of resistance not only in Egypt, but throughout the region as the crisis deepened. Pressure mounted on Mubarak's government. For 18 days the world watched a political struggle unfold in real time. Then, on February 11, 2011, the announcement arrived. Hosni Mubarak had resigned. Celebrations erupted. People embraced in the streets. Fireworks illuminated the night sky. Many Egyptians believed they had achieved a historic victory through largely peaceful mass mobilization. Two major Arab leaders had now fallen within a matter of weeks. The psychological impact was enormous across the region. Citizens began reconsidering what was possible. Protests spread to Yemen. Demonstrations emerged in Bahrain. Unrest appeared in Libya. Calls for reform reached Syria. Governments that once appeared secure suddenly faced growing uncertainty. Many leaders believed the unrest would remain limited. Some assumed their security services could quickly restore control. Others believed the protesters represented only a small minority, yet the political atmosphere had fundamentally changed. For decades, fear had been one of the most powerful tools of authoritarian rule. Now that fear was weakening, citizens who had once remained silent were finding confidence in numbers. Every successful protest seemed to encourage another. Every government concession appeared to validate the strategy of public resistance. But beneath the optimism, warning signs were already emerging. Removing a ruler was one challenge. Building a replacement system would be another. Protest movements often included liberals, Islamists, labor activists, students, professionals, and ordinary citizens with very different visions of the future. They could agree on opposing existing governments. They did not always agree on what should come next. For the moment, however, those questions remained in the background. The Arab Spring was gaining momentum. A regional wave of protest had become a historical force, and many people believed they were witnessing the beginning of a democratic transformation that would reshape the Middle East for generations. By the spring of 2011, optimism seemed everywhere. In Tunisia, the president had fled. In Egypt, Mubarak had resigned. Across the Arab world, Millions celebrated what appeared to be a historic turning point. For many observers, the future looked promising. Old order was collapsing. A new one seemed ready to emerge. Yet revolutions often reveal a difficult truth. Removing a government is not the same as replacing one. During the uprisings, protesters had been united by a common objective. They wanted change. They wanted accountability. They wanted governments that responded to public demands once the old rulers were gone. However, deeper disagreements began to surface. Who should govern? What political system should replace the old one? How should power be distributed? Different groups offered very different answers. In Tunisia, political parties that had previously been suppressed entered public life. Activists worked to create new institutions and draft democratic frameworks. The transition was hopeful, but it was also complex. Years of authoritarian rule had left many institutions weak or deeply connected to the previous system. Egypt faced similar challenges. Political movements that had stood side by side during protests now competed for influence. Liberals, Islamists, youth activists, and established elites all sought to shape the country's future. Democracy promised participation. It also introduced competition. Elections became a test of which groups possessed organization, resources, and public support. Meanwhile, powerful institutions that had survived the uprisings remained influential. Military establishments, bureaucracies, security services, and economic elites had not disappeared. Simply because presidents had fallen, many retained significant power behind the scenes. The revolutionary moment was giving way to political reality. Elsewhere, conditions appeared even more uncertain. In Libya, opposition to Muammar Gaddafi escalated into armed conflict. What began as part of the broader regional wave of protest increasingly resembled a struggle over the future of the state itself. In Syria, demonstrations continued to grow, while tensions between protesters and government forces intensified. In Yemen, political instability deepened. The Arab Spring was no longer a single movement. Different countries were beginning to follow very different paths, yet many people remained hopeful. The fall of long-standing rulers had seemed impossible only months earlier. Citizens who had spent years feeling politically powerless had demonstrated their collective strength. For a brief moment, it appeared that history was moving in one direction, toward reform, toward democracy, toward greater political participation. But beneath the celebrations, a critical problem remained unresolved. The movements that had brought down dictators were decentralized and diverse. They excelled at mobilizing people against existing systems. They were less prepared to build entirely new ones. The institutions required to govern nations' courts, legislatures, security forces, political parties, and administrative structures could not be created overnight. And while protesters debated the future, other actors were already positioning themselves to shape it. Military leaders, political organizations, regional powers, armed groups, all understood that revolutions create opportunities as well as risks. Arab Spring had achieved what many thought impossible. It had shattered the assumption that authoritarian governments were invincible. But as 2011 continued, a new question began to emerge. What happens after the revolution wins? The answer would determine the future of the Middle East. And it would prove far more complicated than anyone expected. The Arab Spring had achieved what many believed was impossible. Long-standing rulers had fallen. Millions had discovered the power of collective action. And for a brief moment, the future seemed full of possibility. But revolutions create more than hope. They create uncertainty. Across the region, new governments struggled to establish authority. Old institutions fought to preserve their influence. Foreign Powers watched closely, and in several countries, growing instability was about to unleash consequences nobody anticipated. The Arab Spring had won its first battle. Its greatest challenges were still ahead.